Good afternoon. Welcome into Sooner Tailgate Show Live. My name is Jason Ray, taking you here for the next hour. Apologize for the quick change in terms of our schedule change. In terms of our scheduled change time, had some issues at work that I had to work out, but now I'm free. Now we're good. So, thanks for joining in and being here with us for the next hour or so, or however long the discussion tends to last. So this is your show. Whatever you guys, however far we take it is certainly up to you. So a lot going on. Obviously, right now there's a lot going on from a recruiting standpoint. Huge pending decision for David Stone tomorrow for Oklahoma. We are 1 week away from Oklahoma football, talking about an actual game. So we'll get into that next week. But this weekend we've got quite a few games. There's the high school showcase games that are going on this weekend as well. I think there's about 8 or 9, maybe 7 or 8. I'm sorry. Week 0 games. I think probably the ones that are the most interesting, specifically to Oklahoma fans, would be Navy and Notre Dame. That kicks off around the 1:30 local time here tomorrow, which is interestingly enough being played in Dublin, Ireland. And then you've got USC hosting San Jose State, which obviously I know that is near and dear and very interesting to everyone else. But for me, when week 0 kicks off, I don't really care who it is. I just like to see, toe meeting leather, and we've got real big time football starting again. So yeah, a lot of good stuff to talk about. And as I mentioned, I will provide my my season prediction for season predictions for Oklahoma record wise. We will go through each and every conference, and I'll talk about my predictions in terms of conference championship matchups for each and every conference, not just the Power 5. We'll go through each and every one, and then spend a little bit more time on the Big 12, certainly. And then we'll obviously we'll probably start with the recruiting side of things, because I know that's what is near and dear to everyone's heart really right now. And then certainly get into any Q&A, anything that you guys want to talk about. We'll certainly get into that. So make sure you guys are hitting that like button, hit the subscribe, as many subscribers as we can get. Absolutely, that's what we want to do. So, and share this with friends so that you guys know that when we're going live, we'll try to do it as consistent as possible. As I mentioned, we just had a big project work wise that's taking a little bit more of my time than I would like, but certainly we'll try to be as consistent as possible. So make sure that you're following me here on X, Jason Ray 1, and as I mentioned earlier, we'll have our Oklahoma post-game live show following each game. Obviously, we'll do sort of what our pregame show is next Friday, and then post-game immediately following the game against Arkansas State, 11 a.m., so around 3-ish, probably 2:30 to 3-ish, anywhere in that time frame, we will go live and go through our post-game stuff. So appreciate you guys jumping in. Make sure if you have any questions, like I said, comments throughout, please feel free to get those comments going, and we'll get to them. So I guess let's start with kind of the recruiting side of things and how things are going. So it's been a really good week for Oklahoma. A couple of commitments, one that Oklahoma expected, one that I expected it, but I didn't think it was going to happen, when it happened. So earlier in the week, I believe it was Wednesday, Andy Bass had announced his commitment to Oklahoma. So 3-star guy out of Oklahoma, Heritage Hall area, about 5'10", 200 pounds, really is classified from a 247 perspective as an athlete. I mentioned when we went live with Mark earlier in the week that DeMarco Murray was a lead recruiter, so they are recruiting him to be a running back for Oklahoma, but big-time athlete, kind of an option style dual threat guy right now from Heritage Hall, but really good. I think he's a guy that looks the part right now, and so when you give him a little bit of time to get in the weight room and acclimated to big-time college football, I think he's going to be a guy that you would look for that could potentially be an impact player for Oklahoma. So good get for Oklahoma. And then the other one, like I said, was a little bit of surprise yesterday, which was Eli Bowen. Obviously, it wasn't necessarily a surprise that he was coming to Oklahoma. I think it was really between Oklahoma and Texas. And I do know that there was a lot of people that felt, a lot of people with Peyton being here, that it was just a matter of time before, essentially before he chose Oklahoma. But I think, as we went forward, it was a little bit of a surprise that it happened yesterday. So that gives Oklahoma, I think, 20 commitments for the cycle, and they are right there in the top 15. Obviously, there's a few more bigger fish to fry. So David Stone, obviously tomorrow, who will be committing at halftime of the IMG game. That's actually going to be televised on ESPN2, so you'll be able to see that. I assume you'll be able to see that live as he announces his commitment. Still between Oklahoma and Miami, all of the crystal balls this week have been have seen him going to Oklahoma, and so I think right now at this point in time, I'm still there. I waffled a little bit earlier in the week because I knew, kind of the influence that that Miami had on some of his inner circle, particularly his mom, that was very, very intrigued and wanting him to certainly to go to Oklahoma. I'm sorry, wanting him to go to Miami, but I think he's always had the desire, and he's always really felt like that Oklahoma was home for him. Obviously being from Oklahoma, but really just the staff and Todd Bates and the recruitment with him, and I think he's always wanted to be an Oklahoma Sooner. So we'll see how that transpires. I still think there's nothing that's really led me to believe right now that he's going elsewhere, especially as the week has progressed. I've seen, this is not like Nwaneri. I think a lot of the people from the Missouri side thought all along over the last up in the week leading up into his announcement that he was going to go to Missouri. Now there's not that's happening on the Miami side. There's not a whole lot of, they think that Miami's still in the picture, but again, there's not a whole lot of really just where they are thinking that Stone is going to go to Miami. So again, I think it's Oklahoma's. You have to know what kind of kid David Stone is, because I think a lot of people, even including myself, when I look at it, but then as I think through it, when you looked at his latest tweet, I think he'd mentioned, he'd retweeted Hayes Fawcett's tweet that basically talked about where is he going to go and who it's down to, and I think David Stone tweeted out that a lot of people were going to be surprised by what he decided to do tomorrow, meaning on Saturday. And so I think it's just him trolling a little bit. He's one of those kids that has really enjoyed the recruiting process. He is he's a bit of a jokester. He does troll quite a bit. So I do think that he is still just enjoying the process. But again, there's a lot of things that certainly could happen between right now at 4:10 p.m. and tomorrow at, I think, 6. I think the game starts at 6, so around 7:30ish when he makes that commitment announcement. So, but I think as of right now, the way I feel and everything that I've heard, I think Oklahoma's still in a good spot for him. And some of the other ones that you continue to hear, Nigel Smith, I think he's gonna make his announcement in a couple of weeks. All things seem to point to him being one of the kids that has been solid. Oklahoma doesn't really seem to be at this point going to be any surprise for him. 4-star defensive lineman. Grant Bricks, I think, is the other one. That's you've heard that this. What I've heard is this could break at any point. I think this is an Oklahoma and Nebraska battle. Both sides feel good about where they're at. I think Oklahoma's made a lot of headway here as of late. So those are the big ones that Oklahoma has right now. And like I said, I think I misspoke earlier. I believe Oklahoma has 21 commitments as it states currently. And so I think we'll see how many they end up getting. But I think as of right now, the staff looks good in terms of having this recruiting class be potentially a top 5 class, in the same vein that it was a year ago. So got a few kids that they need to finish with, certainly. But yeah, I think everything is looking good right now on the David Stone side. Then we'll see if that changes between now and tomorrow. So, but anyways, I know it's going to be great drama. Everybody's going to be glued to that decision and what ends up happening with him, as well as you watch through the week 0 slate tomorrow. So next kind of on the agenda, I really wanted to talk through where kind of I see my predictions for specifically for Oklahoma this year. I think there is, as you go through this and kind of think through where Oklahoma is right now compared to maybe where they were at the end of the year. And 6 and 7 obviously isn't the standard. It's not anywhere close to being the standard. So I think everything that Oklahoma has done and a lot of things that I've continued to hear through fall camp is really, really positive. That they've been through camp without any real significant, huge, big time injuries or some nicks. There's some people that's missed some time, but not anything serious season threatening series, I would say. So I think that's good. You see progression that's happening when you go through every single individual unit on both sides of the ball. You see, number one, kids that have been here last year are getting better. 2, you've got increased productivity that's expected from these positions based on recruiting class additions, and then also based on transfer portal additions at every level. And so the key, I think, moniker that BV and the team, whether it's the positional coaches or whatever, have continued to kind of sing is that the calling card has been the competitive depth. And I think it's there. It seems to be there across the board. And everything that I'm reading and people that I talk to, it does really seem to be one of those things where it's continuing to make a difference. It's making a difference, and the expectations are very high. And so, there's a lot of things that I think some of the biggest issues last year on the offensive side of the ball was really the production on third and fourth down, but very particularly third down. Left a lot on the field on third down, and that's got to be better all across the board, whether it's just some inaccuracy on third down with Dylan Gabriel, whether it is just not executing, at a high level, whether it's some play calling, whatever that might be, just across the board, really just getting better in terms of executing on third down. So I think that's one of the biggest ones. And just a few of my concerns coming into this year was, as we looked on the offensive side, just a couple on each side would be, is this offensive line going to be as good as it was a year ago? Oklahoma was very successful in being able to run the football. Are they going to be as good, or maybe even better than they were a year ago? Does Dylan Gabriel kind of make that extra step in terms of being a little bit more efficient on third down, not missing some throws, just being a little bit more consistent in terms of what he's been able to do? Do we have a wide receiver that steps up, or is it more of a committee, or is someone going to be able to kind of take the reins? And because that's the perceived weakness within this team. And then when you look at the defensive side of the ball, can they get enough pressure? I think the defensive line is the biggest key to all 3 levels of the defense. Because if you can get pressure, if you can get constant pressure on the quarterback without giving him a lot of time, obviously your secondary doesn't have to hold up as long, as long as it typically would. And then certainly, you've got some secondary play, which appears to be the strength of the team. And so as you go up and down, you've got some more depth at the quarterback position with Jackson Arnold there. People that have been to practice and have watched, DG looks better than he did a year ago, just in terms of his speed. I think he looks a little bit faster than he was a year ago. I think you've got some other things in terms of just focusing on the little things that he needs to focus on. And I think the other thing that we take a little bit for granted is he was coming off of an ACL tear the year before, and coming into the Power Five and a new situation overall from going from UCF to OU. So I think that's part of the consideration. And so he's got a year in the system, a year acclimated with this team, the environment, the culture. So you would anticipate that would allow him to be a little bit more consistent and just be better overall. When you look at the running back room, you've seen a lot of really, really good things from this group. I think the one thing that you have to be super, super excited about is the progression of Marcus Major. I think in some aspects there's some belief that he may have even won the job. Even be that as may, I think you've got 3 really solid backs that you can turn to this year that has a really good committee type approach in terms of when you look at Gavin Sawchuk, Javante Barnes, and Marcus Major. And then you've got some other kids that are going to have an opportunity to play, I think, probably in some specialized roles. Tawi Walker is a guy that really seems to be a guy that probably gets some third down type run, really good in pass protection, just seems to do all the things that you want a running back to do. Maybe he doesn't have some of the explosiveness of Barnes and Sawchuk and Major, but does have the ability to get some of those tough yards in between the tackles, goal line situations. So I think that's a role for him. So you've got 4 or 5 guys that you feel comfortable with. When you go to the wide receiver room, again, there's about and Jeff Lebby talked about this a little bit last week in some of his media availability, that you see. Believe probably 6, 7, 8 kids are going to be able to contribute for them. They got a lot more that they feel like that they can play early on. So I think you'll see that a lot early on in non-conference play if they kind of settle on who they feel is their top 6. So I think in a perfect world, 8 might be a little too much, but I think 6 is where he likes where you would like to be. So I think you're going to see, like I said, a lot of guys, Jalil Farouk, Gavin Freeman, Drake Stoops. I think those are some of the household names just in terms of what you would expect coming in. But you got Nick Anderson that has had a phenomenal camp and looks the part, absolutely looks the part. Jaden Gibson's come on late in camp and has played really, really well. Jacquez Padaway is a true freshman that's going to get some run, absolutely. Here, and then you've just got a lot of others. Andrew Anthony has been very consistent in camp, so yeah, I'm very interested to see and intrigued to see what that looks like. And then the defensive line, there's that's the question mark, but I think you've got a lot more depth. I think you've got kids that are more acclimated to, maybe not necessarily just the system, but more acclimated to the strength and conditioning program, more acclimated to what Brent Venables wants to do, what Todd Bates wants to do, what Miguel Chavis wants to do. And so I think you've got a lot more, again, competitive depth there than you had a year ago, that will pay dividends, and all the way through to the linebacking core and the secondary as well. So I think there's a couple of areas that I'm really concerned about, that I think you have the ability to mask these types of things. So talked a lot about this all fall camp. Tight end continues to be a problem. I've from some of the things that I've heard, it's so much a problem is they don't feel like that they can even get a lot of quality reps when Stogner's not in the game. So I would say if there's anyone on this team that Oklahoma can ill afford to lose injury or anytime, it would be Stogner at tight end. Now, I think there's some things that you can do to overcome that. You can go more 5 wides. You can have more 2-back sets and things like that. But then you can get more guys that if just there from a blocking perspective. So, yeah, I think that is still a big question mark, but there's some things that you can do to mask that. And then the punting game is another thing that I continue to hear, that it's just a little bit of an adventure from time to time. And again, the punter's not necessarily a guy that you think about until it is a guy that you think about. So when you kind of take all that into consideration and look at the schedule, and the schedule sets up very well for Oklahoma, particularly early on. I think when you look at what the schedule looks like, I think you've got if you run into a situation where you are anything but 5-0 heading into Texas, I think that's a problem, because when you look at early on, Arkansas State game one, just kind of a mid-tier, mid-major team that on both sides of the ball, Oklahoma should be able to do whatever they want to do to a certain degree, right? And then you've got SMU coming in game two, which provides a little bit more of a challenge, particularly on the offensive side of the ball for Oklahoma's defense. That will be interesting. They're breaking in a new quarterback in Preston Stone that is taking over for Tanner Mordecai, that's moved on to Wisconsin. Then you go to Tulsa, which will be a glorified home game for Oklahoma, but does give you the opportunity to go through, what would be a road game for the first time for the Sooners. But again, Tulsa's, I think, in a little bit of a rebuild mode as well, with Kevin Wilson coming in for them. And then you go to Cincinnati and host Iowa State before Texas. Cincinnati, in my estimation, is one that they've lost. Their roster has been gutted completely from Satterfield or from Luke Fickell moving on to Wisconsin. You've got a lot of guys that just aren't there. Certainly not there anymore, and so it's a little bit of a rebuild there. I actually have them in the back half of the Big 12. Really I think they have the opportunity to finish last in the Big 12. That's just how much I think of, the struggle that's going to happen in terms of their roster turnover. And then Iowa State kind of mirrored in that whole gambling controversy. Not sure who they're going to have. That doesn't look like Hunter Deckers is going to be there. They're starting running back Jaheim Brock is not going to be there as well. He's no longer on the team. So yeah, you've got a couple of things that, again, it would be a shocker and very disappointing if for some reason Oklahoma slipped up. So absolutely should be 5-0 heading into Texas. And then you look at the back half of the season, you've got some challenges in teams that maybe not necessarily are great, but in terms of road tests, then that will be interesting. Obviously, you've got the Texas game that's always going to be a challenge. It's probably the only game all year where Oklahoma is not going to have the talent advantage on the field, and probably won't be at this point in time, will not be favored in. And so you look at that, and then you move forward. A couple of tricky road games. You go to Oklahoma State, which, again, I think Oklahoma State's going to be down a little bit, maybe a considerable amount. But with it being the last Bedlam game, they're going to do everything that they can, obviously, to ruin Oklahoma's departure from the Big 12 and entrance into the SEC. So there'll be a lot of emotion around that. I think the real popular pick for Oklahoma to lose is at BYU, and so I think that will be an interesting game, kind of a not really a trap game, because I think that's one that they're going to have circled that they're ready for. But again, it could be another tricky game. You go to the game's escaping me right now. All of a sudden. I'll get back to it. You host TCU towards the end of the year as well. The other road game was at Kansas. At Kansas is another one. Kansas probably has one of the best, maybe the best quarterback in the Big 12 in Jalen Daniels. But I'm not sure what they're going to have on the defensive side of the ball. So that one's another interesting game. So, as I look at the schedule, I'm not necessarily going to pinpoint which game I think that they're going to lose, but I think at the end of the day, I think this team goes 10-2. I think you're 10-2 with, either a loss against Texas and BYU, or Texas and someone else, or maybe not even Texas, just a couple of losses here. And so I think, and we'll get into that as we go into the predictions, but I do think that's enough to get Oklahoma back to the Big 12 championship game. Again, we may not. It's one of those things with the schedule. I don't know that we'll necessarily see this, but it could potentially be a situation where it is more kind of not necessarily a smoke and mirrors side, but more so that the schedule is so soft that there's not an astronomical amount of improvement, just enough of improvement to to kind of change that from 6-7 to 10-2. Now, I think I preface that by saying I think Oklahoma was better than their 6-7 record a year ago. A lot of those losses, what was it? I'm sorry, 5 of the 7 losses were by 7 points or less. So being able to finish in crucial situations, have better depth will allow, I think, Oklahoma to be more successful in a lot of those games. So I see a few comments here. We'll get to those and see exactly what you think here. So, hey, Jackson, Boomer Sooner, thanks for joining. 8 more days until Oklahoma football. Yeah, couldn't be more excited. SMU game could be fun. Yeah, absolutely. I think the only thing, when you look at SMU, breaking in a new quarterback will be interesting, but they've got some big time additions from the transfer portal. So I think they're going to be a challenge on the offensive side. Defensively, I think they're going to be about as bad as they have been. So I think Oklahoma should be able to do about what they want on offense if this offensive line and just the skill positions are as good as I think that they are. Then absolutely. So Jacob Leffler, thanks for joining. We really struggle with run stopping on short yardage down. How much improvement, if any, can we expect? Yeah, and I think they need to be a lot better against the run. Again, when you looked overall last year, 122nd out of 131 teams in overall defense, and Oklahoma just can't be. Oklahoma just can't be that bad. It's embarrassing for the program. It's embarrassing to be that bad. So, I think one of the things that I have said over and over again is this team doesn't necessarily have to be top 20. If they can just be an average defense, I think this gets Oklahoma to where it wants to be and needs to be, between that 9 and 10 win situation. So, yeah, I think you'll see quite a bit of improvement. That's my hope and that's my assumption based on some of the guys that you got in the middle of the defense that have gotten better since a year ago, and then you've added that depth. DeJoun Terry is one that I think of in terms of that, but Jeremiah Kelly has had a really, really good camp, and is there. Isaiah Coe as well, and then you've got some guys on the end that will help, not necessarily from a run perspective, but I think that'll help. Then you've got Stutzman and Kanik that are very solid there that you would expect from everything that I've seen. Just tons of improvement from Stutzman, and then Kanik is really acts like he belongs this year. So without a doubt. Jimmy, a lot of people are saying Kansas will beat us this year. Yeah, I mean, I think Kansas is going to be a really, really good team, right? Kansas almost beat us a year ago. Oklahoma won a shootout. I think it was like 51-41, something in that neighborhood. So yeah, Kansas is going to be a really solid team. Now, really good offensive line, good skill position. Daniels, I think there's Keaton has mentioned this here in another comment, but he's been injured a little bit in part of camp. But if he's healthy and he's there, and Jason Bean, when he came in and played, he was really successful last year as well. So I think when you look at that, that's going to be a big challenge for our defense as well. So I absolutely agree. And so Big 12 is stacked this year. Yeah, absolutely, Jackson. I think when you look at this, when you look at the Big 12 this year, I don't know that you can say that you have one team outside of really Oklahoma and Texas that, and even maybe it's even a stretch for them to either one of them to be a playoff team. Like you don't have I'm sorry, I've got Kansas on the brain. You don't have a Michigan or Ohio State or a Georgia or an Alabama or an LSU or kind of something like that. But I do think that you have more kind of competitive balance up and down the Big 12, probably more so than you have in any other conference right? I think you've got Cincinnati and West Virginia and Iowa State that are probably some teams that are there towards the bottom of the conference. But then you've got a lot of game in, game out with Oklahoma and Texas and Kansas State and Texas Tech and and Oklahoma State and TCU and and a lot of these teams going forward. That yeah, absolutely. I think you have a lot of areas where you're going to be challenged, but I think it's nothing like Oklahoma's going to see in the SEC. So I think you would like to see to a certain degree, maybe Oklahoma had Kansas State or Texas Tech on the schedule, instead of maybe Iowa State and Cincinnati, just to prepare them a little bit more. But on the other side, I think it allows some confidence for this team to do some things like that. So absolutely. Yeah, some comments here about the Kansas game. Yeah, it was really deceiving, but it was a 10-point game at the end of the day. For sure. And you guys remember a couple of years ago, needed a heroic play from Caleb Williams to beat Kansas. So it's a team that's certainly on the rise. They're much improved than what they were a year ago. So now, Jackson, I've got Kansas and TCU beating OU. I have OU beating Texas for a second time in the Big 12 title game. That would be nice. That would be nice to see. Hope you're right, Jackson. On both accounts, I would much rather beat Texas twice and lose to Kansas and TCU and then make that title game. Mr. John, I see Jackson Arnold coming in the Texas game for the win, maybe in the title game. I think if you see a situation where Jackson Arnold is playing significant minutes for Oklahoma, it's not a good thing. I think as much as I want to say that, and yes, I think it's absolutely critical that they get Jackson Arnold some playing time, especially early on in the season, just to see what they've got, get him some game reps and experience, because he's going to be the guy next year, most likely. He's going to be the guy as they go into the SEC. So it's going to be critical that they get him in some experience, and whatever that looks like. If it looks like that they're going to try to do the 4 games, if they have some packages for him, I would like to see him in some fairly competitive situations early on in the season. Now, I'm not saying that we bring him in the third series against Arkansas State, but what I am saying is, if the game's somewhat still in the balance, but it's early on enough in the game, but it's somewhat still in the balance, like 3 touchdown game or something like that. Get him some playing time, get him some experience, and so you have an idea of what you have coming into next year for sure. Keaton, if any of the freshmen get a massive amount of play, I'm worried. Don't be. There are going to be some freshmen that's going to get a decent amount of play, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. So don't worry. I mean, it's not anything to think that you would be worried. I think that's just because of the talent level that Oklahoma's been able to bring in this year. When you look at number 4 recruiting class in the country, okay, the number 4 for a reason. I mean, they've got some big time players. So I'll just kind of go over a few that I feel confident that's either going to start or going to play some significant minutes. Josiah Wagner is one. Peyton Bowen is another. Perhaps Makari Vickers in the defensive secondary. PJ Adebare on the defensive line is going to play some. And then you've got some. I mean, Jackson Arnold's going to play a little bit. Caden Green around the offensive line, I think, is going to play. So you've probably got, I think, 5 or 6 guys that are going to play some significant minutes, some significant time. I would say probably Josiah Wagner and Peyton Bowen probably play the most of any of the freshmen. Now, it's going to come a time in the season. I don't know if it's game 1. I don't know if it's Texas. I don't know if it's in the back half. But there's going to be a time that PJ Adebare plays significant time for this team at some point in this year. The kid is just too good. He's too talented. He's got his body. Oklahoma doesn't have anyone like him right now. Currently, nobody like him. He is a specimen, and from everything that I've heard, he's just continuously getting better and better and better. I think early on you'll see him in just some predictable situations where, he doesn't have to go out there and think a lot. And once he continues to get a really good grasp of what the defense is, I think he will play a lot. I'm really excited about where Oklahoma is from an edge position perspective. That might be the area that I'm the most excited for, because I think you're going to see just a significant amount of improvement on the edge when you look at. I mentioned Adibari. I mean, obviously he's not going to be a starter, but you've got Rondell Bothroyd that's come in and continues to be really the most consistent consistent guy. You've got Ethan Downs, who continues to get better and better. You've got Trace Ford, who has a really good first step. R. Mason Thomas as well. And then we mentioned Adibari. Then you've got Stripling that's there. You've got his name's escaping me. Starter last year, starts Reggie. I can't think of his last name. Anyway, played really, really well early on in the season, tapered off. So you've got 6 or 7 deep there that you feel nice about where you're at from a defensive end perspective. So really excited about what that group is going to be able to do. So Jackson, that easy 5-game stretch is going to give OU a lot of confidence going into Red River rivalry. Absolutely. Completely agree. I think that should, and again, you have the opportunity to progress and get better early on in the season, which should be without a big time threat of a potential loss there. So Keaton, I'm not saying seeing them get some play is nice, but I wouldn't want a freshman to have to play most of the season. I don't think it's a situation. I don't think you'll see the situation of have to play. I think some of these freshmen are just going to be too good to keep off the field. Peyton Bowen, Adibari is the two that I continuously think of. So, okay, so let's go. We've got about 20 minutes left, so I'm going to go through. I'll end with the Big 12, and I'll start with some of the mid-major conferences and go through really my predictions on some of the championship games here. So this is more of a national flavor, so feel free if you have any other questions. We'll get to the OU specific questions again. If you have some as you're listening, feel free to drop them in the comment section, and we'll get to those as we kind of finish here with the Big 12. So, on the MAC conference, Toledo and Ohio. I think this will be a repeat of last year's MAC championship game, in which I believe Toledo won that game 17-7. Two really, really good quarterbacks for Toledo and Ohio. You've got Nathan Rourke for Ohio, and then you've got Daquan Finn for Toledo. So, a lot of returning players for both of those teams. In which I would expect to see both of those teams come back. Conference USA, Western Kentucky, and UTEP. UTEP is a team, is a little bit more of a defensive team. They had the bowl game 2 years ago, just missed out, going 5-7. Last year, I think a lot of their key Conference USA matchups are at home. So I like UTEP and Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky is just going to have a phenomenal offense, a fantasy football manager's dream in terms of what they will be able to produce on the offensive side of the ball. Austin Reed, probably 45 to 50 touchdowns he'll be able to account for Western Kentucky. Again, you worry about the defensive side of the ball for them, but I think they'll be able to score enough to be able to win and be successful and make it to that Conference USA championship game. Sun Belt, I've got Coastal Carolina and South Alabama. I think South Alabama is a team that had their best season, one of the best seasons ever. I think a really, really tricky matchup with them going to Oklahoma State early on in the season. Could be a potential upset for Oklahoma State. Won 10 games a year ago. I believe they returned 9 starters from that offense. So I've got them going to the Sun Belt Championship along with Coastal Carolina. I think Grayson McCall coming back, he hit the transfer portal and ended up coming back to school. I think that's a big time add for Coastal, and I think that's enough to get them to the championship game. As we go to the Mountain West, I'm Boise State, and a little bit of a surprise here. I've got Air Force. Air Force is one of those teams over the last 4 years, when you don't count the COVID season, they've won 10 games in every single year. Just haven't had enough to make it to that conference championship game. I think they're able to accomplish that this year. They've got some plug and play kids on the offensive side of the ball, just in terms of what they like to do. Return, I believe, 9 to 10 starters on the defensive side of the ball. And then Boise State, again, 10 game winner a year ago, and I think they continue to do that this year in the Mountain West. Then you go to the American. Then you've got Tulane and UTSA again. Tulane was the American champion a year ago. Great team. Beat USC in the Cotton Bowl last year. Brings a lot of talent back. Michael Pratt, the quarterback there. They do have to replace a couple of the running backs, so it'll be more of a kind of a committee approach. But like what they bring to the table at UTSA, won 10 games a year ago. Won, I think, 8 of their last 9 games overall. So I like what they bring to the table as well. Frank Harris, one of the better dual threat quarterbacks that maybe you haven't really heard a whole lot about there. So now I'll talk a little bit more as we get into some of these Power 5 matchups. But let me see if there's any specific comments here specific to those areas. No, let's keep going. So Pac-12. So I've got USC and Oregon. I think, when you look at USC's schedule, I have tons of questions about their defense and what they're able to do to potentially win a championship and make it to the college football playoff. Now, they've made some big-time changes in terms of acquisitions, whether it's through the transfer portal, recruiting, or whatever that is. So I think they've got some talent upgrade on the defensive side of the ball. And then when you have Lincoln Riley's offense with Caleb Williams, you always have a chance, right? So if they can get, a few more stops, I think they have the ability to win a conference championship. And then Oregon, I think Oregon's going to be a lot better than people think. Top 5 team, potentially at some point during the season. So I like what Bo Nix is doing there, and I like what they've been able to do in Dan Lanning's first year at Oregon. I really like what they're going to be on the defensive side of the ball. I think they're going to be a lot more improved. Very interesting early season matchup. Get an idea of really what they look like in week 2. I think they travel to Texas Tech, so I think that'll be very, very interesting to watch that game for sure. In ACC, Clemson and Florida State. This one was really easy. It was, if I'm being honest, this was one of the easier ones to look at, because I don't think there's, when you look at competitive depth up and down the conference here in the ACC, I just don't think there's a lot there. I mean, you've got North Carolina, who's probably the 3rd best team. You've got some other teams like an NC State and a Louisville that can potentially make some noise. But I think these 2 teams are heads and tails above the rest of the group. And you'll see this matchup early on in the season as Florida State goes to Death Valley to face Clemson. And I think the things about Clemson that I'm worried about is, you've got Cade Klubnik, who's going to be the starter this year, with DJ Uiagalelei, who has transferred over to Oregon State. But how good is he going to be in his first full year starting for Clemson? A little bit of mixed reviews last year. Played pretty well in the regular season in a couple of instances where he played, and then didn't have the best bowl game against Tennessee, and so jury's out on them. Obviously, bringing in Garrett Riley from TCU helps tremendously with Clemson and what they're going to be able to do. And then Florida State, I think a lot of us saw firsthand how talented that team was. Jordan Travis from the offensive side of the ball, and you've got Jared Verse on the defensive side. Really big start for them against LSU. I believe that's the Monday night Labor Day game. Either Sunday or Monday, one of the two. No, I think that's Sunday night. I apologize. Yeah, Sunday night game against LSU. So I think that will kind of help their trajectory one way or the other in terms of which way they go. But tons of just a big time recruiting year, tons of talent returning from a year ago, and so I really like Florida State a lot to to be a mainstay in that top 10 next year, or this year, I should say. Now we'll go to the Big Ten. I've got Michigan and Wisconsin. I think when you look at, it's interesting. You got one side of the conference that is very heavy, and the other side that's that's a little bit less. When you look at Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State, I think you've got three really excellent teams on that side, and then I think you've got Wisconsin probably battling with. I think I was going to say Iowa, but I think Wisconsin is probably got a little bit of a lead. Illinois is an interesting team. I think they're going to be they could pose some problems this year for some teams as well. But really like Michigan. Michigan's one of as I look at them, would not be surprised to see them win the national championship this year. I think they're going to be that good. They've got J.J. McCarthy, who is really kind of a budding superstar as a quarterback. It's not asked to do a whole lot typically for them. And, they almost asked him to win that game against TCU, and he was almost able to do it in the bowl game last year. And then you've got probably the best tandem of running backs in the country when you look at Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. So really like Michigan this year. Definite playoff team in my mind as we sit here right now. Then you go SEC, Georgia versus Alabama. Kind of the reason Georgia's obviously a little bit easier to identify, but then you got I think Georgia's got some holes. Certainly, I think there's some areas that I would be concerned about if I was a Georgia fan. The running back depth isn't quite what it's been in the past, and then they had another hit by one of their kids that was expected to be a contributor this year. And then I think you look at some of the defensive stars that they had to replace. So I know they recruit well. They just bring 5 stars in left and right at Georgia. So I think they're going to be okay, particularly with the schedule. I don't know that there's going to be a big challenge for them. I know they go to Auburn early, which we'll see what Auburn's going to be able to that's going to have. And then you've got and then they go to Knoxville to play Tennessee. And so those are the 2 challenges. And now Alabama, I go back and forth with Alabama. I think, there's some concerns with me at the quarterback position and even at the wide receiver position. They weren't as, dynamic as they have been in the past at the wide receiver position last year. Bryce Young kind of made that team what they were on the offensive side of the ball last year. So I think their offensive line is going to be good. I would assume that Jalen Milroe is the guy there, but you've got Tyler Buckner, and then there's another true freshman that's in that competition. But I think Milroe will be the guy. Going to learn a lot about them early on, obviously, as they host Texas, and then as we go to the Big 12 championship game. I've got Oklahoma and Texas. Maybe it's just hopeful, wishful thinking on my side. I would love to see, and obviously I'm not ever going to hopefully confuse anyone for being a Texas fan. I'm not a Texas supporter. There's a big part of me that wants to see them lose every game, but there's a big part of me that wants to just throw this in the Big 12's face and see Oklahoma and Texas face off for the Big 12 championship game, especially after the comments that Brett Yormark made the other day about being able to get Oklahoma and Texas out of the conference a year early. So really like what I see. At some point, Texas is one of those teams that they're just going to have to put it together. They're 1 year they're going to put it together, and it's hard to identify. It's hard to identify when that's going to be, but they have loads and loads of talent on this roster this year. So I think it will be interesting to see, what that's going to look like, and if they're going to be able to turn that around this year. But right now could see Kansas State getting in there. Could potentially see Texas Tech. TCU is there as well. So those are the ones that I think, but I think we're going to see another Red River rivalry in the Big 12 championship game. So let's let's go through some of the questions that we have here. And so let's start with John. Outside of the question, will linebacker be the strength of this year's defense? Stutzman back, Kanik experienced transfer starting, maybe. So I think you hit it on the head. You've got Stutson and Kanik. I think you've got some kids that could provide some depth. I think Kobe McKenzie is going to get a decent amount of run for this team this year. I think you've got Kip Lewis that's going to provide some depth. I think you've got Deshaun McCullough. That's really more of a cheetah position, but I think he'll play up close to the line and kind of look obviously like a linebacker. And then I think you've got Lewis Carter that is really, really athletic. I don't know. I think he'll get some time early on to see if he's a guy that can be really a depth guy, or if he's a guy that could be a rotational guy. So I think it'll be interesting. Now, I don't know that I would say it would be if the linebacker is going to be the strength of the defense, but I do think it's going to be much improved from what it was a year ago, John. Absolutely. I think the thing that you look for Stutzman is leadership, which I think he's provided. In camp, you look for him. I think sometimes he got lost a little bit in coverage on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, just in pass defense. So I think that has seen to improve. So I think it'll be much improved over what it was a year ago. Keaton, I think we'll have 3 running backs hit 700 plus yards, but no 1,000-yard receiver, but like 4 to 5 guys with. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think on both of those sides, it's going to be a big time committee approach, and then you certainly will see Oklahoma, have the hot hand. There, absolutely. So let's see, Jackson, Austin Reed led the nation. Yeah, absolutely, one of the better quarterbacks in the country. And we'll end with this. Will Stone commit to the Sooner Saturday? Again, I've been wrong on some of these commitments, but I do think from what I hear right now, again, I said this early on in the show at about 4:10, now that we're almost to the 5 o'clock time frame. Yes, I really like what we see out of Stone. A lot of crystal ball commitments to our projections to Oklahoma this week. I know he made a little kind of a cryptic tweet about everybody going to be surprised about what he does tomorrow, but I think that's just him, kind of playing with everybody, being a little bit of a troll like he likes to do, and just enjoying the recruiting process. So as it sits right now, I still like where Oklahoma's at. That could certainly change within the next 12 hours. 24 hours, I should say. But yeah, I think Oklahoma's in a good spot. And I think there's 2 narratives that we'll see play out tomorrow. One, if Oklahoma's able to get Stone, I think there's a little bit renewed excitement in where Oklahoma's at from a recruiting standpoint, and being able to get some big time kids, even with where Oklahoma has been at defensively over the last few years. Oklahoma's not gotten a 5-star interior defensive lineman since 2009. And that one was a little bit of a flop with DeMarcus Granger. And so it's a long time coming. And so I think the narrative, like I said, the narrative around that's going to be super, super positive if Oklahoma's able to do that, on the heels of hopefully looking at an Oklahoma improvement on the defensive side of the ball. Now, if he chooses to spurn Oklahoma and go somewhere else, mainly being Miami, I think there's still continued concern about whether or not what does Oklahoma have to do to get those defensive linemen, particularly the interior defensive linemen. So yeah, I know there's some questions about Jalen Redmond. I think as he came out, he was more of an edge guy as opposed to an interior defensive tackle. And I'd have to go back and look. I'm not sure if he was a 5-star or not. But in any event, I appreciate everybody joining. I appreciate everybody jumping in here a little bit late. And again, my apologies. My apologies for being a little bit late. I had some work obligations that I had to get to. But again, enjoy the games tomorrow, week 0. As I mentioned, I think there's about 7 7 games. Some of them are a little bit under the radar, but still, for me, at this time of the year, as long as it's a football game, I don't even really care what it is. So, you've got the Notre Dame Navy game early on, and then you've got some other games throughout the day that will be, like I said, some a little bit under the radar, but some will be very interesting. Ohio at San Diego State, I think, is a very, very interesting game later in the evening as well. So, again, thanks everybody. We will see you again. See you again next week. We'll try to get on with Mark, depending on what time he goes during on in the week for Oklahoma Sooners Live, and then we will be back here again next Friday, doing a lot more preview of Oklahoma Arkansas State, among some other things, and looking at some other high school games potentially. Bixby looked extremely strong last night in their 42-16 victory over Owasso. Actually was up 42-0 in the fourth quarter, 28-0 at halftime. So we'll get into some of that as some of those week 0 games are going on tonight, and we'll get kicked off more in earnest next week. So everybody enjoy the games this weekend. Happy David Stone Day tomorrow. Boomer Sooner, and God bless.